Hi, everybody. My name is Ray, and welcome to this kind of new series, which I am starting. This is going to be a lore series based on The Sims 4. So, The Sims 4 doesn't necessarily have a ton of lore when it comes to external households. The only example I can think of is the Landgrab family and San Myshuno, or the other influential families. Maybe they get to know each other, but it's typically within the same world that relationships are made. And even then, there are some issues, especially with the Landgrab family, and I believe it is Willow Creek, and then Johnny Zest and Oasis Springs. Even though they're both base game, it doesn't necessarily fix the fact that Johnny Zest is the son of Nancy and Jeffrey Landgrab, which is really sad. So, regarding all that, I wanted to make some lore within my game, and I wanted to share it with you guys because even if it may not be canon within the Sims universe, it's just something that I personally believe is true within my game. And I wanted to share the similarities between these Sims, and I wanted to kind of have a more interconnected world, especially if I'm playing with all the worlds. For example, even if I stick to, let's say, Tortosa, even if I stick to just this place, sometimes I want to go to the romance world. I forget the name of it. The Ciudad Emerada. So if I wanted to go there, because I think they are quite connected within the way that they look, not necessarily building-wise, but within the Sims within there, I think they're very similar in the fact that this is about love, this is about love. I think The Sims can be connected in some way. And I try to do that with a bunch of different worlds, and whether or not they work, you guys just let me know. But for now, I think I'm just going to get us started, and I'll show you the first household in which I want to make my case in why I think this kind of works. So, I'm sure everybody knows Zoe Patel, Mitchell Kalani, Jay Huntington III, and Gavin Richards. These are from the Rumi household in Oasis Springs, and they are quite popular, like romance candidates, especially Zoe Patel and Jay Huntington III. He is quite infamous, especially for his non-committal trait and his tendency to be a very attractive sim for most other sims. And I kind of looked at Jay Huntington, and as I've been looking at him, I've kind of realized, he reminds me a lot of another sim, a sim that I think doesn't really get enough love. And that is Brent Hecking from the Hecking household. I think that they look so similar, especially within their face shape, and I know that has to do with the Sims 4, base shape models. But I also love to look at Brent and see that he's dyed his hair. His eyebrows are this color. I haven't changed any of the household. As you can see, Jay Huntington has this horrendous haircut, and if I could, I would change it. But if I were to change Brent to his natural hair color, it's the third hair color. I believe that is the exact same hair color as Jay. And if I click on him, yep, that is the same exact hair color. They have the same face, and if I go to their skin tones, which I just sped past it, he's in the top warm category. I'm pretty sure Brent is in that warm category as well. He's in the warm, and it's right down here, but honestly, they are kind of close within their skin tones. And I like to make it in my save where Brent Hecking is actually the brother of Jay Huntington III. I like to believe that Brent and Jay, or I guess Jameson if you want to go by the wiki, which may or may not be true, because it is a fandom wiki, I like to pretend that Brent basically was in this brother rivalry, and they both kind of had differing views on what they wanted in life. They both basically felt like, as they grew up, they were both raised under this really big household of what is meant to be a priority, what is meant to be the legacy of the Jay Huntington name. And while I think Jay Huntington III, I think he really took that as I need to be very specific on who I'm going to have as a partner, and therefore he's very non-committal. He's very, I'm not going to settle with one person unless I'm sure it is the right person, and he's very much just headstrong about his beliefs, very into keeping up his appearance. I mean, he has the active trait, and he is a bro, which means he loves hanging out with the guys and he loves hanging out with other people. But he's not truly himself. He's non-committal. That means he can't really do the things that he wants to do without any care in the world. And I think it kind of hinders him. He feels so trapped within this persona that he has to hold because he's the only one with the last name. The Huntingtons were a big family. He came from wealth, I would imagine. And if not, then he at least comes from a legacy that he wants to carry on. And I feel like Brent, he grew up within that and he realized it's not really worth it. He wanted to find love. He's a romantic. He wanted to find companionship. And so he grew up loving dogs and loving a family in which he could grow into. And then he met the love of his life, Brant, and they got married and he kind of cut ties with Jay. And I'd love to go into this little backstory between them as they're brothers and they don't really hang out anymore. They don't really have a relationship, but they both grew up with this kind of wealthy mentality. I mean, if we go into the hecking where they live in a pretty big house. This is a really big house for just the two of them. I like to think both Brant and Jay Huntington, they came from a decent amount of money, which allowed Jay to get the house that he lives in, and he had to get roommates because he realized his ambitions weren't really going anywhere. He never really needed to take up a job until his brother left, and his brother was kind of responsible, but it didn't really help in the long run because he just feels so trapped. So this is the Hecking household. This is a big household for one little dog. And then within the trailer, they have a cat, but they don't have a cat. They have just a dog named Rosie. This huge backyard, this beautiful house for just the two Sims. And typically, this big house, it is what? This is like a 30K house. That's not even a starter home. That is like a family that's underway. That's like a 4-sim household, which is what Jay has. And we'll go more into just why I think it kind of works. And even though there's not many bedrooms in here, it's still a place where they live. If I go to Jay, the roomie's house specifically, they live in this massive mansion. I like to think this is where the Huntingtons kind of made their home. This is where they used to live. So I'd like to think that the Jay Huntingtons, they both had a home within the Oasis Springs home, but they also had a home within the Brindleton Bay area. And maybe they had a bunch of different homes, but honestly, they could only keep 2. And because of that, it went to the 2 brothers, both which really need to get their legacy intact. I mean, Jay Huntington is so closed off and so defensive about his romantic life and not getting too close to people that he hasn't found the one. He hasn't continued his legacy. Whereas Brent and Brant, I think they want to continue their legacy. It's just, it's not going to be a biological legacy, which I think Jay kind of resents his brother for, like, in that way. And even though Jay Huntington, he doesn't swing just straight. I believe he's both. He's bi. It's still very clear that Jay Huntington, he very much values legacy. And maybe Brent and Brant don't even want a kid because they just have Rosie. They haven't moved towards like a biological child. They'd rather have a dog, and a dog doesn't really hold up legacy. So I think there's some tension there, and I kind of wanted to point that out, and I kind of wanted to share some of that lore within my save. And it kind of brings Jay Huntington out of Oasis Springs and into a more countryside view, and it also brings Brent and Brant into this kind of Hollywood type place. I like to think of Oasis Springs as something that's very similar to the Get Famous world. Delso Valley. I like to think that Oasis Springs and Delso Valley are very close. Closer to that still is Strangerville, but also Brindleton Bay. Brindleton Bay is kind of like near the water, so maybe they are kind of at the edges of Oasis Springs and Delso Valley, and it's kind of like Oasis Springs is closer to, if we were to go onto a US map, I would say this is closer to Arizona. This is Arizona. This is in California, closer to Arizona. City, California, and then this could be closer to the top of California, closer to Oregon. And I kind of like to make these worlds kind of interconnect in that way, because I think Jay Huntington, within looking for legacy, he goes to find his brother in Brindleton Bay, kind of has an argument with him, but maybe as well as legacy, he wants fame, so maybe he goes into Delso Valley, and sometimes I introduce Strangerville, sometimes I don't, but I like to see how close these three specifically are in geography, and then this one can be added to because of the lore between the brothers. They're very similar in face shape, I believe, which I know has to do with their facial features. The fact that Brent has the same hair as Jay, and they just are very similar build, and they're kind of opposites in the sense where Jay Huntington is very active. He's very much focused on his physique. He's very focused on where he wants to be in life and how this world has shaped him, and the fact that he wants to find, I think if he were to pick anything other than bodybuilder and focusing on himself, he would probably have the soulmate aspiration, which would really struggle with him, and he would really struggle with because he keeps striking out on romances, or he keeps finding someone who's not up to his standards. And maybe he holds his brother to this standard of, you're just not enough. Also, I'm pretty sure Brent is more fit than Jay, but maybe that's not true. No, they're about the same. But they also have, he's a little bit skinnier. So yeah, Brent is a little bit more physically fit than his brother, but he doesn't even have the active trait, which means maybe growing up, they were both put under rigorous strain from their family to kind of push them to better themselves. And while Brent figured out who he wanted to be, I think Jay hasn't really grown out of that. And so I like to think that maybe Brent is an older brother to Jay. And although they don't get along, maybe one day they can reconcile it and they can be brothers again. But yeah, I like to make these two brothers because I think that's really fun, but they'll have a difficult family dynamic. And I don't know if The Sims will ever do this, where they will have two different worlds, but have them kind of collide in the sense where they connect, but I'd love to see it happen. I like to think that Bess has a brother, and that's Mark Eagleston. They look very similar, in my opinion. They have a very similar face shape, and that's not all that they have in common. They're both cheerful, which I think they grew up being very close to one another. So I like to think that Mark Eagleston and Bess Sterling are brother and sister. They both share the trait of the cheerful trait, and I believe that they grew up together and they were just very close as kids. But while Bess wanted to stay within her city and she wanted to focus on the problems within her city, I think her brother kind of wanted to get away from the chaos, because when we first start the save, the eco lifestyle save, it is not very eco-friendly, and Bess is trying to work to change that. She is a person who is following her dreams to make the world a better place, starting with her hometown. And I like to think that Mark Eagleston kind of saw that, and he just felt so defeated with the world around him. I mean, it's primarily industrial, at least I see it that way when I first go into the eco lifestyle world. And I think he wanted to get away from it all. I mean, he literally, if you go into the household, he literally talks about how he wants to get away from the world. He wants to specifically cut ties with the modern world. I think he grew up listening to his sister and thinking that could never be the way it is. This world doesn't change overnight, and there's no point in me trying, so I'm going to leave. Because he felt so stuck and he felt so trapped from his hometown. And even though he loves his sister, I would imagine Mark and Bess were just really close as kids. They just weren't close as adults because he wanted to move away and he wanted to get away from just the craziness that came from living in a place where he thought the world could be better and it just shows itself to be not. And even though I'm sure you can play as Bess and you can actually get the place to be better, I don't think Mark would ever come back. He's too far gone into the mystery of Strangerville and into the issues that are going on there, and he thinks about the corrupt government and he can't really get away from it all. And even though Bess might be there to try and help him and try and get him away from that, he doesn't really get away from it all. I mean, they're both cheerful, and I love to use the cheerful trait as, oh, they try to take an optimistic view on life, and they try to be quite positive in everything that they do. But I also sometimes view cheerful as a little mask that they put on. I mean, sometimes you can act overly positive and overly happy when on the inside you're not. And sometimes I feel like Mark and Bess, they can be a little bit too enthusiastic, they can be a little bit too ambitious, they can be a little bit too focused on what they want to change in the world that it ends up hindering them when things don't go their way. Like, whenever Bess doesn't do well in her job, she literally gets anxious and nervous because she's not doing enough and she feels like she can't really do what she wants to do because she's ambitious, of course, and the trait allows her to be like really pushing for her to do better. But I think Mark is the same way in the fact that he works to study and try to figure out where he can go in life. What can he do to get away from a corrupt government and a corrupt place that he left? And even in his new place in Strangerville, he feels so trapped, and so he has to find camaraderie in other people, in which he finds two young ladies, Alice Martin and Leslie Holland. I feel like Bess maybe gets pushed away from her brother because she's surrounded by Jules, who just focuses on getting money, focuses on working with the capitalistic structure within the world that they live in. And I find that in most saves, Jules and Bess break up. They're not really partners in crime, they don't really live together long, and they have this toxic will they won't they relationship because Bess is so focused on making the world a better place because it's her hometown. It's the place that she lives in. It's the place she wants to see get better so she can go to her brother and say, I did this, and I know we can do more together, and I can help you within your hometown, and we can work to make this place better. And sometimes I like to integrate that where, because Bess and Jules are kind of a smaller household, sometimes they go to Strangerville and they try and work on different worlds and get them to be a better place. And sometimes Bess is the only one working towards that goal because I find her to be the one who wants the place to be better. But also there's ways where she's influenced by Jules. I mean, you literally get a phone call from her asking for a simoleon a day or 1,000 simoleons, and sometimes there's a chance she'll get your money back and sometimes there's a chance she won't, especially if you don't commit all the way. And there will be some tension because Mark wants things to be better and Bess doesn't always follow through with what's best. Her intentions and her morals are sometimes swayed, especially with the company she keeps. So that's the lore I have for Bess Sterling and Mark Eggleston. And of course, in this lore, this would probably mean that Bess and Mark would have the same last name. But maybe they're half-siblings and they grew up in the same household. Maybe they're step-siblings and they grew up in the same household. I don't know. You could technically change their last name to be Mark Sterling or Bess Eggleston and it would be fine because, you know, the Sims team didn't really connect them. They're not meant to be connected. They're from different worlds. But I love to connect the Sims in this way. We're going to see Grace. I can never say her last name. Anazi? Sure. And I like to think she's related to Julia Wright. They do look very similar to me personally. Not entirely similar, but their face structure is very similar. They seem like a similar build. Not exactly, of course. And I like to think that Grace is the spellcaster who was at the top of her class. She was the one who the family saw as the spellcaster that was going to get the family legacy into absolute just perfection. She was going to be the one to continue the legacy, the one to continue her bloodline, the one to be the best at being a spellcaster. And I mean, she does push herself to do that. You do go into her save, and she is trying to push herself to be the best spellcaster she can be. But I think her sister was not a spellcaster, because maybe their parents were a spellcaster and a non-spellcaster, making her a weaker bloodline. But I like to think that Grace was the spellcaster who got put into the box of, you have to be the best, you have to continue the bloodline, you have to be the one to continue the family name. Whether that be a Nazi or that be just any other, it doesn't even have to be a last name, it just has to be, you have to continue your spellcaster bloodline. Because if you don't, then you're going to let this family down. And that kind of influenced her to be non-committal and romantic. Because she's not non-committal with her spellcasting. She's not non-committal with the work that she does. She's non-committal within relationships. She really desperately wants companionship. And she desperately wants a relationship in which she can be with anybody that she wants. But she has to be strict with who she wants to be with because of her spellcaster bloodline. And because of what her parents instilled in her. And I like to think that her sister, Miss Julia, when they realized she wasn't a spellcaster, she felt incredibly left out. She grew to be a perfectionist, someone who wanted to be noticed by her family, and she wasn't, because she wasn't a spellcaster. So she worked to push herself, and she worked to achieve all means, and she went to university. She became ambitious. She became quite stubborn and quite just focused on being the better person that she could be. She made friends with another person who was not a spellcaster, and they met in kindergarten, and they just wanted to be friends throughout childhood and adulthood, because Julia couldn't really confide with her family about how she was feeling. I mean, the whole family was looking into Grace and looking into her studies and focusing on her, and that's it. Because when you're a spellcaster, you don't really show signs of magical prowess until you're a teenager. And I mean, Grace is a young adult. It hasn't been long since she's become magical, and she's already level 3. She's already halfway to becoming a master, which takes years and years and years of progress and struggle. And I like to think that Grace is the older sister of Julia. And because of the huge space between the two of them, the fact that Julia can't really become the same spellcaster as her sister without just other means, Julia wants to focus on being the best she can be outside of the spellcaster realm. And so she goes to college and she works on her degree. There is a way for you to become a spellcaster regardless of being of the same bloodline or not. You can literally just get a stone and do that. You can get a stone and become a spellcaster that way, but that doesn't really make your bloodline pure. It just makes you I wouldn't say fraud. It would make you a spellcaster of technicality. It's not a bloodline thing. It's not something that goes into your family lineage. It's just a spellcaster through artificial means. That's the word I wanted to use. And instead of taking that route, which I'm sure would have appeased both their parents, Julia decided, I'm going to go into physics. I'm going to go into something that can help this world. It can help other people who aren't as magical as my family. And she goes into handiness. She goes into robotics. She goes into ways maybe within this world of magic, within the rocket science, and I would say just different sciences, because in some ways science is a magic. It is a study of something that we don't fully understand. It's a study of something that can impact our lives positively, negatively, and it can kind of change who you are once you kind of figure out how things work. And I like to think that even though they weren't close as kids, maybe they're trying to fix their relationship. And they're trying to better themselves both in their own respective fields, but they're also trying to better themselves when they work together. I like to think that They do like long chat calls, especially when Julia does university, but outside of university, when she's done, they might actually live together and work together because they're both bettering themselves and they both want to be better people, both as a sole person and within their family. And maybe they both want to show their family that they don't have to be the just struggles and expectation put upon them. They can be whoever they want to be. And I love that. Especially since I think Grace wants to be this person who doesn't care about expectations. She wants to be someone who she wants to be. And maybe when you go through her kind of life, you can choose whether she stays a spellcaster or doesn't. I mean, this is her whole life, where she's been a spellcaster her entire life. So much so that it doesn't even show her bloodline, but I like to think she's a strong bloodline. And the fact that she is so focused on what she wants to do rather than going into a romantic relationship and sticking to it because she feels so pressured by her family. I think the relationship she might want to focus on more would be a sister. Maybe a sister she didn't know because the Sims games didn't give enough family trees. But it's fine. I love seeing families within The Sims, and I love connecting interconnected people, even when they're not supposed to be. So that's kind of my storyline for these two. We have one whose life is kind of sorted out for her, but you can choose whether you want her to stay on the spellcaster path and maybe become overly pressured by her family, or she can choose to be like Julia and pick something she's actually wanting to do. Pick something she's actually passionate about. Not saying Grace isn't passionate. I'm sure she is passionate because there's only one way you can really go into a field and actually excel in it, and it's at least being a little bit passionate, whether that be because you actually like the subject or because you like the attention you get because you're so good at the subject is different. So I'd like this to be just older sisters. I mean, these are like the adults within the family. We don't have too many adults within The Sims. At least I don't find us to have too many adults within The Sims. Maybe now that we have newer worlds, there are more adults. I wish so much I could categorize The Sims in their ages. Like we have young adults, adults, and elders, and then we can also have teens, and I can kind of look through, okay, here's how many teens we have, here's how many adults we have, here's how many young adults we have, here's how many elders we have. And I can kind of go through and maybe make some just friendships, maybe like relationships that they used to have. Maybe two old people used to be in a fling forever ago, and maybe they could rekindle the romance before either of them has their demise, which is kind of dark, but kind of cute. I don't know. But I like to look at the similarities between Maura Fries and Faye Harris. Now, they aren't too similar, but I like to think that they do look similar, at least in my mind. And I know there isn't much to go on. I mean, literally two of Maura's traits are good and outgoing. It's basically the same trait. It's not, but they are very similar. And I like to think Faye, growing up with her family of looking to recycle things and looking to better herself, and also supporting her son, who is just very nervous about getting himself out there. I like to think that maybe he has a cousin, two cousins specifically, which are the daughters of Maura and what was her husband's name? Dominic. They're not too similar, but I think they could be sisters. Definitely. I like to see Faye and Maura as two people who grew up in a family that didn't do so well financially, and they both grew stronger because of that. They're both very close. I like to think that anyways. I like to think that, yeah, Maura is the older sister. She had to grow up taking care of Faye. And Faye kind of learned to recycle stuff with her sister. And maybe they both grew up in the eco-lifestyle world. And as Maura moved out and moved away from all that, and she headed to the Windenburg world, wanting to better her family and better her daughter's family. I mean, literally the two daughters that she have, they're just they don't get along very well. They're very tension filled. It's a very chaotic household. And I find that Mora and Dominic, they kind of struggle with taking care of their two daughters, and they didn't want to live in a place that's doing basically badly. The fact that the eco lifestyle world is a world where you have to recycle, you have to go through the trash to find things of value, you have to either go the capitalistic way and make everything industrial, or you can go the eco-friendly way, and that means you struggle. That means you have to push yourself to recycle the objects that you find, to build the objects that you get, to even go through like clothing and kind of upcycle them. And I love the struggle, but also the pride that these Sims get whenever they do the things that they do, whether that be fabricating items, or they make sure that they upgrade some items so that they use less water and they do less hurt upon the environment. I love seeing that. And I love to think that Mora and Faye grew up within the eco lifestyle world, and they kind of struggled. And while Mora grew up a little bit and she said goodbye to her sister Faye and she went to the Windenburg place, which I think both has roots in a kind of capitalistic world with the clubs that go on and the hangouts that they have. There's also places where you can kind of get away from the capitalistic side and just hang out without spending any money and just hang out without doing too much. Like the Bluffs, I believe it is called. It's the place where you go and there's like the water, and it's the middle of nowhere basically, but there's a bunch of parties there because people just want to hang out and build community without there being a place where you have to spend money, without there being a place where you have to contribute to a society that doesn't really better you in any way. It just hinders you and it hurts you. And I feel like Faye, she wanted to stay within her town or hometown because she fell in love. She found the love of her life, and she has two beautiful kids. And she's working to make it a better place, similar to Bess. And I feel like Bess and Faye would be very close friends. I mean, they're both young adults. I like to think that they could be really good friends. But while Bess kind of struggles with her feeling of wanting to do better, but also being pulled by Jules and pulled into the capitalistic side, and there's this struggle between doing what she wants to do and doing what's easy. There's also this feeling of guilt she looks at when she looks at Faye, because Faye is very much, I grew up through this. I know what it's like to go through having nothing. And so sometimes I like to go through Faye and Mora, and I like to give Faye like a teen look, like she becomes a teenager. And Mora becomes a young adult, not a teen. And I like to put them in the same household. And I like it to be that Mora grows up trying to take care of her sister Faye, and Faye kind of struggles because she's a bit of a glutton. Let's be honest. I mean, this is her trait. She loves making sure she can prepare food, but they don't really have the best ingredients, and so she had to make do with what they had. And being a freegan means she has no trouble going into the trash can. Whereas Mora, she is kind of, I would say, even though she loves the outdoors, she loves going out and doing things. I'm going to find her trait. There it is. I think even though Mora loves going outside and she loves trying to better herself and better her situation, she doesn't really want to go in the trash. She finds that disgusting. She finds it kind of beneath her. And so instead of pushing herself to do that, I think she focuses on taking care of her sister, as well as I'm sure their parents, if we did make parents of the adults within this save, this quote-unquote save between these two sisters, which I made. And even if they, let's say they didn't have a family, let's say it was just the two of them, I like to think that they both came out of it stronger. But once they became adults and they kind of figured out their own ways, and they kind of figured out what they were going to do in life and how they were going to survive, they just moved to different worlds and they moved to different places. And I mean, Windenburg isn't too far away from Evergreen Harbor. I mean, they look very similar in their infrastructure. I find it to be that they look very similar. I mean, the Windenburg has its own like Tudor housing, which is different. but I like to think that they could be close. I like to think that Windenburg is kind of close to the Brightchester world, which is kind of close to the Evergreen Harbor world. And if we go into Mora's household, I mean, they have a pretty big house. Let's go into this real fast. They have a beautiful house. I would say they succeeded. They succeeded on building up, not their legacy, but building up just what they could do. And they're still upgrading. They're still working on it. I mean, she's a freakin' after all. She wants to better herself and do better for her family. And so I'm sure you could take this house and you could totally just add more to it. If I go into the looking at the house from the info panel, you can see that they're looking for a place that is basically a fixer-upper. It's a place that, even though it looks very big and very spacious, it's not perfect for them because they still need to upgrade it. They still need to work on it. And even though it's not perfect, they're working on it together and they still care and they still focus on being better. Also, the fact that only Faye has a job, she's working to provide for her family when she's taking care of Francine, which I'm pretty sure is Cletus's mother? Yeah, Cletus's mother. Faye is the only one taking care. Faye is the only one taking care of this household, and I think it's because she had a very good role model in Mora. And I love to make these two sisters just very wholesome, very sweet to one another. And even though they both have their own families and stuff, I love to see the dynamic between Jeb and his two cousins who just bicker all the time, because I love going into the info panels and actually making their relationships the way that they're supposed to. Because if you do go into the Fry family, you can see, like, even though, like, the sisters are meant to not get along, they do get along. It's just the truth. They just do. And especially when you look here, they do look very similar, and I think they did grow, like, in my mind, in this lore, in this Sims lore that I've made, they're sisters. And Faye grew up with her sister working hard for their family. And now Faye, she's working for her family. And even though Cletus doesn't really have a job, and Francine doesn't have a job, and Jeb is a teen and he doesn't even have a part-time job, Faye still works hard for her family because she grew up with such a great role model, and that's her sister. So, yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this Sims 4 lore with me. It's not real lore because I know the Sims game didn't do this, but I kind of want to go through, I wanted to go through some families that I thought would connect with one another. This is just a sim I made, but yeah, I hope you all have enjoyed this. And if you guys are looking for some more lore that I've added to my saves, maybe I'll do another one, because there is definitely other households that I could go into, and that's not just the non-world households. It's like all of these households. There's so many different people that could all be interconnected if you really wanted them to. And I love to look at where they grew up. I love looking at the backstories and kind of interconnecting them with one another. I love getting people who are just one person. For example, Lynx. It's only her. She could have a family out there, but we don't know because The Sims 4 didn't give her a family. But I could give her a family, whether that be Sims I make myself, or I could have her be interconnected with maybe the Pleasant family if I really wanted to. Maybe they could be cousins. And especially with the new family feature that's coming up where cousins are actually going to be noticed, step siblings are going to be noticed, and the family tree hopefully is going to be fixed. I am so excited to kind of have more interconnected stories and more just interconnected worlds, because I feel like we are missing out on that, especially within The Sims. And we used to have that within The Sims 3 and The Sims 2, and I miss playing The Sims 3, and kind of, even though you can't go world to world, it was this big open place where everybody could be connected if they really wanted to. And even if you had like some people within different worlds, you could technically still have some people come and visit. It didn't work very well, but you could. And I love that The Sims 4 has these different worlds, but it's a shame that they're not all connected in the way that I want them to. So yeah, this is me kind of bringing all these stories together and weaving them into one another. And I'm sure I could do the same with all the different worlds specifically. If I go into the geography and I look at all these different, just not even the architecture of the buildings, but also the agriculture, and look at the trees and the mountains and the lakes, you can kind of form a story of what this world looks like, and you could even make a map of it. And I think that's really cool storytelling you could do. And especially as they're adding more and more, some stuff I haven't bought yet, but more and more within this huge world and within this huge story that you could have all interconnected. I'm just excited to do more within this game. So, yeah, I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think. So, I'll see you all later. Bye!